Tēnā tātou kua taimai nei I tēnei pō. Tuatahi aki ka mihi o ki te mana whenua o tēnei rohe, ngai tuahu riri, tēnā koutou. Ka mihi hoki o ki ngā tohu o te rohe nei. Kera atu o ngā mata waka, ngā uri, ngā hau, e whae hui mai nei I tēnei pō. He mihi aroha tēnei kia koutou. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you everyone for being here and braving the elements this evening. Ko Emma Johnson tōku ingoa, and I'm the Communications and Marketing Lead at Te Pūtahi Centre for Architecture and City Making. And it's a real privilege to welcome you all here for a warming conversation. He Whakawhiti Kōrero, Christchurch Conversation, Communicating Climate Change. First up, we'd like to thank and acknowledge the organisations that support these events, which happen once a month in July, August, September and October. So a big thank you to Christchurch City Council, which funds the series through the Sustainability Fund. So, tonight we are exploring climate change communication. And when done well, this is a means to an end. So essentially, we're asking the question, how do we effectively communicate climate change with care and consideration and in a way that inspires action? How do we responsibly navigate the need for urgency and the possibility of climate overwhelm or paralysis? So what can bring us together to mobilise? Now, how we have these conversations and the channels and words we use will shift depending on the audience involved and the type of action that we would like to see. A chat with a family member at the start of their climate change journey invites a very different approach to one we might have with a decision maker. So tonight, our invited speakers consider climate change communication from a range of angles and a variety of scales, zooming out from the conversations that we need to have with ourselves to those that are more city-wide in nature. To briefly outline the rest of the evening, next up we have 4 quick-fire presentations, which will be followed by a panel discussion of around 45 minutes. We'll then round out the evening with a poetry reading from Megan Clayton. Now, whether you're attending the event online or you're in the room, you can ask the panel questions by texting your question to 022 565 8693. You can take a note of the number now, but rest assured it will also be on screen during the Q&A. For our online audience, you also have the option to ask questions via the chat function on YouTube as well. Questions from both sources will be conveyed to the panel by the Te Pūtahi team, and apologies in advance, there's every chance we won't be able to get through all of them, but we will do our best. Now, it's my pleasure to briefly introduce our speakers. We'll first hear from Martha Jefferies, filmmaker and climate communications specialist. Martha creates compelling narratives that bring urgent environmental issues to global audiences. Following Martha is Kera Sherwood-O'Regan, a social impact strategist and climate justice advocate based in Pūtahi. And her mahi focuses on story sovereignty, co-design, and community-driven social change. After that, we have Gloria della Porta, who is stepping in at the last minute for her colleague who is unwell. Gloria is the General Manager of Terra Nova Foundation, which is a think tank focused on impactful change. And our final presenter is Lucia Campbell-Reeves, an 18-year-old student from Pūtahi, who is passionate about advocating and fighting for social, climate and disability justice. She joined School Strike for Climate Pūtahi over 2.5 years ago, where her work in activism and advocacy began. But first up, please welcome Martha Jefferies to the stage.
Kia ora koutou. By 2014, I knew a little bit about climate change, but not enough. I was living in New York City, and I've been travelling the world making food and travel shows, filming in dozens of countries. Everywhere I went, I started noticing signs of change. Food systems shaken by shifting weather, ecosystems under stress, people quietly noticing that things weren't how they used to be. A few years earlier, in 2010, I'd been in Egypt, just a few weeks before the Arab Spring erupted. And there were many political and social forces at play, But drought, water scarcity, and food shortages, all linked to climate stress, had made a fragile situation explosive. By 2014, the world was experiencing its hottest year on record. My husband was making art about overconsumption and collapse. The climate crisis was humming in the background of my life. And yet, I felt somewhat paralysed. I recycled, I rode a bike, composted, helped out at the community garden, but none of it felt like enough. I didn't know what actions would really shift the needle. I felt locked in and gripped by fear. And my fear was very personal. I didn't talk about it much because all I really had to say was, I'm scared. And then everything changed. I had a meeting with the producers of one of the first big climate TV series, and I was offered a job, directing and producing on the second season of the Emmy Award-winning show. I'd managed to convince them that my years of travel and observation gave me a perspective on climate. But honestly, I knew very little about climate science or the systemic machinery that kept the climate crisis in play. I felt way in over my head. I was charged with directing 2 episodes. Each story followed a celebrity as they explored their own personal journey with climate change. But in truth, it was my journey too. A crash course in climate science, politics, psychology, and communication. It was an emotional roller coaster. The experience changed the course of my life. In the decade since, I've been working on climate full-time. At first, I wanted to shout and scream to make everyone wake up to the crisis. But then I realised the work was different. Most people don't ignore the climate crisis because they don't know about it, or they don't care. They simply don't know where to start. And I've learned that before we can act, we have to have some honest conversations with ourselves. And that starts with how we feel. When we acknowledge and process the complicated feelings around the climate crisis, we can channel them into action. When I began my own climate journey, I cycled through a storm of emotions. Grief that things had gotten so bad. Disbelief that this could even be happening in our lifetimes. Rage that just a handful of people and companies had caused so much harm and was still doing it. Gratitude for the immense beauty of our planet. And joy in finding people all over the world who were so deeply committed to change. All of these feelings matter. All of them are valid. And all of them help propel me to keep showing up. Thinking about how I feel is not a distraction from my work. It's part of the work itself. The climate crisis is vast, complex, and overwhelming. Humans have never faced anything like this before, so it's natural to feel paralysed and unsure where to start, especially in the emotional storm that so many of us carry alone. We feel guilty for flying or driving or eating meat or buying too many clothes. And while our personal choices do matter, it's important to remind ourselves that we're part of bigger systems that push these behaviours. We didn't personally create this crisis, and it's not on us to solve it alone. It's not your fault. Fossil fuel companies have spent decades shifting the blame onto individuals. They even invented the personal carbon calculator, so you'd feel bad about your individual choices and distracted from the toxic systems that they set up. So if you felt guilty, know this. Your guilt is natural, but it's been in part engineered. Fear is natural too. As a species, we've never dealt with anything like this interconnected, this urgent. Anger is totally justified because while we're all affected, a tiny minority of wealthy, powerful actors continue to drive this harm. Overwhelm is valid. And joy, it's not only permissible, it's essential. Joy is what keeps us going. Joy is an act of resistance, and it's our fuel. Ignored, our feelings can block us, harden us, but faced head on, they become fertile ground for action. Your emotions are not signs of weakness. They're signs you care. When we meet our feelings and sit with them, we're ready to step into action. And one of the most powerful ways is by reconnecting with nature, with each other, and with a sense of purpose. Acknowledge our natural life support systems. Building relationships with the living world around us is a vital form of climate action. Tap into your senses. Notice the ocean breeze, the trees, the smallest life around you. Reconnect with where you are. Witness the precision and perfection of nature. It can feel counterintuitive to slow down when so much needs doing, but it's this work that will help build resilience and endurance and help take care of your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. We're in this for the long haul, so this matters. Then start thinking about how you're showing up. Are you modelling the future that you want to live? Do you vote in elections at every level and make sure you know your candidate's position on climate? Are you conscious about what you eat, where your food comes from? Does your bank invest in fossil fuels? How do you get around? Do you only buy what you need? Do all of this with knowledge it's impossible to get everything right, but it's the sum total of your actions that matter. Don't focus on being perfect. Focus on moving and growing in your actions and your commitment. And then you might be ready to start having conversations. And you'll be surprised when you open the door how many people are also ready to talk. They just haven't known where to start. Studies show that most people care about climate change, but many simply don't know what to do. And research also reveals that a lot of people think they're alone in their worry, when in fact the majority of people share the same concerns. So open the door and start listening. Don't judge. Share your own story. What made you care? What you struggled with? And end on a positive note. Your shared values and the many co-benefits of climate action. Stronger communities, connection with nature, better health, and fairness. The greatest predictors of health and happiness are community, connection with nature, and a sense of purpose. Acting on climate offers us all that and more. So embrace your feelings, all of the messiness of this moment, and connect with your community to talk about it. Use your feelings as fuel. This is unquestionably a complicated time, but by facing our feelings honestly, reconnecting with the world around us, modelling the future we want, and having honest conversations with each other, we can turn our concern into action and unlock our collective power. Thank you.
Mei haro. O tēnā koutou katoa. What an awesome kōrero. I'm going to very much pick up where you have left off. Especially, I love those closing points around those shared values and co-benefits. So, kia ora koutou, for my kōrero today, we're talking all about whanaukataka. That's where it starts. So, relationships. Oh, if we go the right way. There we go. Relationships are the essential ingredient for social change. So, if we want to create that positive change, that's where we need to start. We need to start with listening to each other, with connecting to each other, and finding how we can connect the change that we want to see with what people value, with what people care about. Now, as I'm sure many other people in the room who have been in the climate space for a long time can feel, sometimes it can be really disheartening, where we feel like we're taking one step forward and then 2 steps back. We see that we've maybe had some positive wins, but then actions aren't going far enough, or we all know that we're not on track to meet our targets. And to me, the fundamental issue there is that our mainstream model and understanding of climate change and how we act and how we talk about it is broken. When we think about how climate change has been framed, at least for most of my life, it's been in very Western terms. This Western scientific model of thinking and talking about climate change really prioritises one way of knowing, and it means that other ways of knowing, particularly Indigenous ways of knowing, are really disconnected. It creates this high bar for entry where we feel that we can just throw information at each other. If we only educate people about the science, then they'll get it, then they'll act. When oftentimes what we're doing is talking down to people and we're disconnecting them from their own power. We're coming from a place of deficit and we're making it really challenging to get people involved. So how do we think about climate change in a way that is more effective? Climate justice is a model that I think gives us a much more honest and much more inclusive way to talk about climate change. It recognises that climate change really magnifies a lot of the other issues that we have in our society. And here we have a little diagram, you'll excuse my illustration, but basically where you can see when we're coming from a climate justice lens, we're really recognising the systems that produce climate change, right? And these are the table legs down here, things like colonialism, extractive capitalism. And they're producing this tabletop, this symptom, which is climate change. But you can see it's connected to so many other symptoms, whether that's poverty, language loss, disconnection, struggles for Indigenous peoples in maintaining our culture. And oftentimes we get scared to talk about this. We get scared to acknowledge the systemic scale of things. But actually, when we take that approach, we're giving people a lot more different ways to engage with the issue of climate change. We give people the opportunity to engage on issues that they're already working on and build that cross-movement solidarity. Because why wouldn't we work with people who are working on poverty issues and they can work with us around climate change and climate justice? We build that power when we take a climate justice approach. On top of that, people also can see the momentum. We've always struggled with this issue that it's really hard to see climate change, right? Whereas when we're actually tackling the root causes of climate change, when we're looking at tackling those legs of the table, you can see that table toppling, if I can get my words right. You can see that table toppling. You can see the change in biodiversity. You can see when people have got their land back. That's much more visible, and it helps to create that confidence and that momentum for people to take more powerful action. So, with that said, when we're communicating in systems and justice terms, we're making climate change real for people. Now, I know we only have a short amount of time together today, so I won't go into the whole thesis, but essentially the work that I do, we really look at how we can communicate about climate change using that base of values, but also pairing that with rights. And when we do that, we're actually recognising the whakapapa of our movements. We're also making sure that we're affirming the expertise of excluded communities, particularly Māori and others who have been working on taiao and climate issues long before we had this term of climate change. It also connects us to frameworks and protections like Indigenous rights protections that we can actually leverage in our action. It helps us prevent some of the pitfalls of prior movements when we see people's stories not being respected as the tauka that they are, and we see people burning out of the movements, or particular rōpū, particular groups, especially marginalised groups, feeling that the climate movement isn't a space for them. When we take this approach, it critically enables us to take responsibility for the role that we're playing in a much larger climate conversation. That means that I'm thinking, if I'm using something urgent, if I'm doing some rage bait to get you to sign my petition today, is that actually coming at the cost of you participating more meaningfully in other climate action tomorrow? And it means that I need to recognise my role in that. And so when we pair climate justice with this rights and values-based framing and messaging, we create a healthier, stronger, more just and more cohesive movement. I think we'll get to some tips at the end of our panel session, perhaps, if we have time. But essentially, to wrap up, the same systems of oppression that are causing harm in our communities are the same systems that are causing and producing climate change. Looking at that complexity, that's what's happening, I need to click over this way. Looking at that complexity, these systems can feel really daunting. They can feel really immovable, but as has already been touched on, these are actually things that are made up of human beliefs, behaviours and values. And the very good thing is that these are entirely changeable. So tēnā koutou katoa, thank you so much.
Kia ora everybody. So tonight I'm subbing in for the wonderful Rose Challies, who unfortunately is unwell, but lucky for you, you get to listen to my take. Maybe not so lucky. So thank you to Te Pūtahi for creating space for these really critical conversations. I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm going to speak to creating change within and across organisations, so collectors of people, businesses, not-for-profits, social enterprises, etc. There we go. So this is a picture of me speaking at a climate march when I was 18 to a group of impassioned climate activists in Blenheim about the urgent need for climate and environmental action at the time. At the time, for me, messaging from the media around climate change was direct, alarmist and intense, and messaging from those older than me was along the lines of, we have the faith that the youth will fix it. Does that sound familiar? I believe those messages were well-intentioned to empower and support Moxie, but the more I heard it, the more frustrated I was at the implication that it was on a single generation to fix this massive intergenerational and intersectional issue. Climate change is so challenging for humans because it feels untouchable, the scale of it beyond the control of any one person. We regard it as faulty operation of an external system, an environmental issue, which we regard with a cognitive dissonance that disconnects us from taking personal responsibility for it. It's communicated through graphs and data, which makes it feel foreign to those who don't speak the language. But what we are so clearly being shown by our planet is that our behaviour as a species is fundamentally tied to the functioning of our ecosystem. Our collective action has shifted how our planet operates. This is our call to action, and this is now where our power lies. Communication around climate change is overwhelmingly negative, designed to create a sense of urgency so that people pay attention. This has been necessary in the past, but without strong messaging around personal action, only serves to generate fear and anxiety. It is no surprise that when it comes to designing solutions, before we even begin problem solving, we have primed ourselves to go into battle against climate change, an opponent which appears stronger, faster, larger, and unpredictable. An organisation is not an entity. It's a collective of people. It reflects the values, experiences, passion, and perspectives of the individuals which form it. If our people feel disempowered and disconnected, we cannot expect an organisation to undertake transformational change. We must create space within our spaces and our schedules to firstly unpack, explore the opinions, biases, perspectives held within our team so that we understand the foundation on which we are building our approach to change. We have to get creative. Our imaginations are desperately underutilised in our daily life. We limit ourselves constantly by perceived barriers and boundaries, often shaped by fear and uncertainty. We need to create cultures in our organisations which embrace creative thinking, allowing ourselves to consider the angles to climate change we don't usually explore. Have you considered the potential opportunities that climate change will allow for your organisation? Those sort of questions. And we need to connect. This is echoing sentiments we've already heard, but this is really, really crucial. Climate change is a symptom of disconnection of humans with our planet. We must integrate connection into how we work and make resources available to do so. We also have to get really honest with ourselves as to how we use natural resources. We do not have enough of them to be wasting them on unnecessary, short-lived luxuries. If we consider planetary well-being as a non-negotiable variable in our decision-making, we will find ways to treat ourselves that aren't at the expense of the planet. If you're in a position of leadership, be the one to make the first move and be okay with being in a bit of discomfort. So, celebrate, support, and amplify those who are doing the truly good stuff. Our future is already being built by those who are shifting the model. We are fortunate to be surrounded at Terra Nova by organisations who are paving the way. A great example of the shift is Pure Salt, who are rewriting the script for how to do luxury tourism. Their visitors experience Fiordland by boat, spending unplugged time in the beautiful natural ecosystem and helping to protect it at the same time by getting involved in the trapping and monitoring efforts in the fjord. At the Terra Nova Foundation, we call this kind of organisation an earth-positive organisation. They address need, they minimise consumption, and they contribute back to the planet. Our communications must be about organisations on this journey, in this way, not the businesses shouting about little edits while they continue their business as usual, enabling them to grow unsustainably. We must talk from what we know is true. No lies, not even little ones, and no excuses. We have to say this to get customers, to win friends. We don't want to rock the boat. We must speak from our truth. We must speak from who we are. When we do so, we create new connections, new relationships, new actions, and new opportunities. Our future is not fated. We all have the power to make the difference today. This is about you, this is about your behaviour, and this is about your planet. Thank you.
Kia ora I te whānau. It's so exciting to be here tonight and to see this beautiful room of new faces here. My name is Lucia. I'm a tangata tiriti, and I'm a student activist here in Pūtahi, Christchurch. So I have been working with School Strike for Climate for just over 2.5 years, and in this time I have also been dabbling in direct action with Peace Action Pūtahi, Climate Liberation Aotearoa, and organising hikoi for Te Tiriti. So I've been getting a taste for all of the intersectional and interconnected kaupapa happening around the city, who are all actually fighting the same root problems, as Kera was talking about before, with intersectionality within the climate movement. So first of all, can I just get everyone to raise your hand if you have heard of School Strike, if you're familiar with the kaupapa? Yes! I asked this question to a group of med students recently, and no one raised their hands, and it was a truly depressing experience. So I am so glad to see this. As we know, School Strike started back in 2018 with Greta Thunberg striking from school to demand action from her Swedish parliament, and this created a huge global movement of rangatahi, high school students organising and demanding action from their governments worldwide. And this movement continues on today around the world, here in Aotearoa and here in Pūtahi, Christchurch. So what we do here is we do all that we can. It's a struggle, but to get all of the rangatahi that we can from around the city, to strike from school, come and meet in the city, and we march through the streets and go to the Christchurch City Council, where we demand climate action from both our city council and from our national government. And aroha mai. So what we do with School Strike, obviously what we're trying to do is get rangatahi along, and I am proud and pleased to say that we have actually a huge bunch of pakeke, of adults and the older generations, who are our most consistent faces in our crowds, which I'm so grateful for. But what we're trying to do, is to mobilise our young rangatahi who we want to go through into their careers and the rest of their lives with climate at their soul and social justice in their soul. So one of our main modes of communication is social media, and obviously social media is a controversial thing, but it serves as an amazing tool for us rangatahi to become educated on politics and on climate, and it is the main way that we are able to reach rangatahi around the city and get them along and involved in our work. And our way of communicating is to try and be really relatable, to make it fun, to make it consistent, and that's how we grow our following and our audiences to keep our movements going and to keep our people showing up. So yeah, we want to make it really relatable for young people. So as a movement, school strike, also as Kera was talking about before, over time, thankfully, but there's still so much further to go, the climate movement has started off as a very Western and Pākehā-centric thing, mainstream. But over time, we're starting to bring in more intersectionality into our climate movements. And this has been a slow but very important process within school strike as well. There's been lots of mistakes made, and over time, we have realized as a movement how deeply important intersectional climate justice is. Advocating only for what we have kind of been raised to view as environmental issues, advocating only for that scratches only the tiniest bit of the surface, and it really is so much more effective to communicate to rangatahi and to get rangatahi involved by going through with that intersectional approach where whatever background you come from, whatever communities you care the most about, that connects to the climate kaupapa. And what we want to get rangatahi knowing is that dealing with climate change, however intimidating the task is, the actual action, it can be fun, it can be exciting, and especially to get young people out when, you don't have to be contributing your spare time to this incredibly intimidating task, but it can actually bring so much joy to your life. And I know for me personally, like joining school strike and getting into activism was a huge turning point in my life, and now I know like what my biggest, most important passion is in my life, and I think that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to communicate to rangatahi, is this can be a joyful and exciting and motivating thing, and there is hope, and we just all need to get involved. So yeah, we'll get into it more in the panel, but kia ora.
Ngā mihi kia koutou to all of our speakers. I'll briefly introduce our panel chair for this evening and invite all the panellists to come and get themselves organised on stage. Donald Matheson is a Professor of Media and Communication at Te Whare Wānanga o Waitaha, the University of Canterbury. His research focuses on public communication, including journalism, racist discourse online, and communication ethics. He co-edits the journal Ethical Space. So Donald will lead the panel discussion for around half an hour or so before we open it to your questions. So remember that you can ask those simply by texting it to the number on the screen, which has magically appeared behind me. And for those, just a reminder, online, you can pop them in the chat. Please join me in welcoming the panel.
Oh, kia ora koutou. These are very comfortable chairs up here, so if we're not off, just give us a shout. Thank you to all the panellists for fantastic introductory Kōrero. I made lots of notes, and I think we'll have a great conversation now, building on that. Kera and Lucia talked about connecting climate crisis with other issues. And I wondered whether we could start by open it up to any of you, but I'd be happy to hear from all of you. Can you talk us about a moment where you have connected the climate crisis to another issue? How do you do that? How do you create those conversations that are intersectional?
Juicy to start off with. Kia koe.
Kia ora. Well, I instantly think back to last year for school strike, which was a moment where we went super intersectional with our demands nationally, which I think definitely got some critique. I was doing some research for this last night and read a scathing review from some random man on our intersectional approach to our demands last year. But we had demands like scrapping the Treaty Principles Bill, granting humanitarian visas to Palestinians in Gaza currently. We had quite a range of demands for Palestine and to do with Indigenous sovereignty. And yeah, people will critique that, but we have to think about the end goal. It's not just climate action, it's climate justice. And yeah, as we say, this comes down to so many root issues. So how can we possibly be trying to be good people and fighting for a world of climate action when we know that the amount of emissions coming from dropping bombs and causing a genocide, for example. So we just have to stay true to our hearts and really recognise the issue for what it is, which is at a deeper level.
Thank you, Lucia.
Tēnā koe. Firstly, can I just get like extra clicks, extra snaps for Lucia? Because she touched on a point that I was hoping to connect to as well, and I think you've said it much more succinctly and eloquently than me, and perhaps just to bring a little bit of that structural side to it, and how does it fit with my little table analogy that I had, is when we think about colonialism, it's been really challenging. I'm not going to lie. I started out doing climate activism before there were cool things like school strike. It was very nerdy. It was very much you need to know all of the climate science. It was very turning up to councils, writing submissions and being baby bureaucrats. Much less fun, much less engaging, much less effective than what the Rakatahi are doing these days. And so for me, it was really transformative when I was able to connect with the International Indigenous Peoples Caucus, International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, where we're having these conversations about how climate change is connected to colonialism. And, when you look at that colonialist system as one of those root causes of climate change, it is just so massive. And it's so hard to get people to hear that conversation, because people go, oh, well, we don't really care about that, or that's just too political, or it's too difficult. But the connections are just massive. And, there's nothing really much more carbon intensive. If you want to take the very specific, I'm only going to think about climate change in carbon terms, like I've got the tattoo, like we're all, we're all understanding that sort of basic around carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, et cetera, even by that metric, even by the Western scientific metric around what climate change is or isn't. Colonialism is one of the biggest, most massive contributors. There is just about nothing on this planet more carbon intensive than taking people from one country on the other side of the world, coming over in ships with all of your people, needing to use warfare to subjugate other people and to say, hey, Indigenous people that are living here, actually, we want this country to look like Little Britain. We want to change all of the landscape, we want to change the farming, you want to change your food systems, you want to change your social structures. It is all-encompassing, and it is one of the most carbon-intensive processes ever to create it and then to continually sustain it. And when we look at this issue, I know I'm rambling here, but when we look at this, one of the biggest emitters in the world is the US military and our militaries in general. And that is exactly why you know, anyone who gives a crap about climate change and gives a crap about climate justice, the easiest place for us to start is to say no more colonialism, no more genocide, no more bombs. It's quite simple.
Kera, kia ora. Martha and Gloria, how do you follow that?
It's funny, actually, when I first started working in climate, I was living in the States, and I spoke with the US military about what was going on. They were wanting to do this thing about greening the military, and things have changed a lot in the last decade, but it was the first time I'd heard the term that climate change is a threat multiplier, which means it exacerbates every single existing problem. And I talked about that a little bit in my talk about the Arab Spring was many factors at play, but it was the sort of spark that set it all off. So climate change exacerbates any existing problem that we have. It's racism, migration, food shortages, anything, poverty, inequality, all of it. It's all interconnected, and that's partly why I'm always telling people to really look at the natural systems we live in, because once you understand that interconnectedness, which is te ao Māori, it's most indigenous perspectives think in that way. So another problem of colonialism.
Yeah. I echo a lot of these thoughts as well. So hard to follow, but I suppose being now working in this space, having looked at it from the outside as a student and young person, I've found it incredibly frustrating how easily we default to environment as a separate sector, and I am so grateful and joyful whenever anyone is making the connection publicly between climate change and any of these other social and social issues, and I would include animal rights as well in this, because the way that we are treating our environment is a direct reflection of our disconnection to our humanness and our humanity. And I would say to anyone who's in media and has the power and option of connecting social justice with climate change, it's so important that you continue to do that, because otherwise it will continue to be the dirty little secret that no one talks about. And I noticed over the course of the flooding in Northland, whenever that was, a couple of years ago now, there was a distinct, at least from my perspective, there was a distinct lack of connection between the event and climate change. That has to change, because we're still regarding climate change as something that is going to happen in the future and not as something that is happening now. So, I think that's my piece. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Martha, you talked about emotions being fertile ground for starting these conversations. I wonder if we could talk, a lot of the talk from the four of you has been emotional, about ground and owning them. Can you talk a wee bit more about the role of emotion alongside rationality and science and analysis?
I think for a lot of people, climate change is a very private anxiety. And I think a lot of people historically felt like if they're not a scientist or a policymaker, they don't have a right to have these conversations. Or they're afraid of getting it wrong, or they don't know enough, and so they just don't do anything. So when things, and we know this, humans have not evolved that much over the last few thousand years, so we haven't evolved to cope with this level of stress and anxiety. So the natural response is actually shut down. So tonight I was given the brief just to talk about individuals, so I talk about the systemic change required as well, but from an individual level, that emotional journey is a really important one. And processing those emotions allows you to redirect them and channel them into action. So that I think it was Joan Baez's action is the antidote to despair. Getting that momentum actually is a really great way to quell those emotions, but they are important to acknowledge and process.
Thank you.
I would like to add, if that's a space you're involved with, that's a really key part of our resilience moving forward, not just our infrastructure, but how do we deal with these really massive disruptive events as communities in our mental health.
Tautoko. You go ahead. All right, I'll pick up on that one then. Yeah, I mean, just tautoko what's been said so far. I think, so in my mahi, a lot of the time, we're working with organisations who maybe already have an interest in climate change, maybe they are more focused, you know, or coming from that mainstream climate lens. And so when we're talking to them around climate justice, a lot of emotions can come up. You know, a lot of people can find things really confronting because we're asking people to consider, you know, their own privilege, their own life experience, you know, and as you say, a lot of this is, you know, these are things that people hold very privately, and especially when it comes to things like climate anxiety and despair. And so one of the things that I found quite challenging is that, especially at an organisational level, you know, when you're working with whether it's NGOs in the mainstream climate space or other organisations, councils, government agencies, etc., it can be really challenging because people can oftentimes take that as a bit of a personal attack. And people, you know, will have these feelings come up because, as you say, like, it is a bit of a protective mechanism. It is a bit of a protective mechanism going, well, I think I'm a good person, I think I'm okay, I'm trying to do my best, I know what I've got on my plate in my life, and I know that I care about these issues, but now you're trying to talk to me in terms that, you know, I just wanted to be here for a conversation about climate change, but now you're saying I need to think about racism, I need to think about colonialism, I need to think about all of these things. And I think within the mainstream climate movement, we've often tended to try and jump past that discomfort. We say, actually, let's bypass that and let's just focus on the action. And I think that's been one of the things that is really challenging, because then as a collective, we're just continuously focusing on action that actually doesn't really work very well. You know, it's not tackling those root causes. It's not joyful. It's making people stressed. It's making people burn out. The number of people that I've seen in the years come into the climate movement, you know, as if it's one big thing, but, you know, come into the climate movement and burn out, be exhausted, get disillusioned with how the change is happening. And it happens because we're not collectively working through that discomfort. We're not creating that space for people to have different realities and to have different experiences and to say, okay, how do we make space for us to do work in a way that's not replicating those same systems? And I see that a lot within the mainstream model of campaigning. It's very much modelled off the same kind of parliamentary campaigning, you know, and that is an inherently really stressful, often quite fraught space. And people are coming to change making with that same perspective, and so it's continuously creating this environment that is really stressful, that is really disconnective. And as you've said, you know, that antidote is actually having positive action together. So I think it really starts with being able to take that moment and, you know, when you're confronted with something, to be able to go, okay, I need to work through my emotions of this. How can I support others who are working through their emotions about that? What is the self-work that I need to do so that I can show up in the climate movement or in whatever collective action it is, coming from a space where you've already got a full cup, where you already are feeling supported, rather than constantly coming from that space of burnout, where you're then actually just contributing to that cycle amongst everyone.
Thank you, Kera. Lucia. Well,
I was just thinking about how, I totally agree. Like, going forward, we're going to have so much space for how to support people through the emotional load that is grieving our perception of what our futures is going to be or should be. Like, that is what it is to start to think about these things, and it is so hard. Like, I think for anyone who, especially if you're just starting to kind of think about climate change and all of these issues, especially that beginning part, it's so scary and it's so painful, and that's when you can start to just think, oh no, I can't think about this. But I think that's why, like, we have to remember the system which has caused all of this, is colonialism and capitalism, right? And that's all it's all individualism. We're so individualistic. That is another huge cause of this entire crisis. So to deal with our emotions, even though it feels like a private thing, we have to make that collective. And that's why the work that we do has to be collective. We have to focus on collective action because you need people. That's what we need to do. We need to reconnect with our people, with the taiao, and it is people and the taiao that are going to help us to regulate and to deal with those emotions so that we can come back stronger and keep our work sustainable.
Kia ora koutou for those responses. We could keep. There's so many ways of taking this discussion forward, but there was one phrase that stuck in my mind that Gloria used, that we need less battle talk and more imagination. Can you talk about, maybe if you would like to start us, how do you tap into people's imaginations to find other ways of talking about living on Te Taiao?
I think you just have to start with what brings people joy. Everyone's got their inner child, or their connection to play and their connection to planet through sensory experience. Speaking from having worked in an office job, I spend 40 hours a week in the most sensory deprived space, sitting in front of a computer, looking at a screen all day. It doesn't feel completely natural, to be honest, and it's something I'm reckoning with coming into adult life. Is this really how we're spending our time? It's so important that as leaders of teams, or as leaders of our lives, that we intentionally carve out space to connect to the things that make us human, that the things that I guess elicit real joy and spark. I guess I don't have a super succinct answer, but we have to be the guardians of our joy. The daily systems that we engage with and do take a lot of that out of it. I mean, taxes and banking and, all this stuff that you go, I don't really want to do this. We have to safeguard and advocate for ourselves to go out and have pockets of joy frequently, because otherwise we can just so easily lose that connection. So I guess when you are interacting with yourself and with others, connecting from a place of real humanness, I see you as a human, regardless of the label on your forehead. And what do you enjoy? And then you can start to form an approach which is specific to each person based on what they enjoy. Because you've got to have personal connection. Otherwise it's not going to work.
Martha, you work in the level of mass media products which are seeking to connect with people on a larger scale. How do you connect with those same challenges?
Well, I think a lot of climate storytelling has traditionally kind of swung between these two poles of like doom and gloom or earnest and preachy. And so I am definitely in the space of carving out something in the middle. My kind of personal 3-part strategy for change is to make climate action aspirational and cool. So make it something fun and that what people want to be involved with, and really talk about those co-benefits. And the truth is, it's super fun biking around. It's way more fun than sitting in a car in traffic. Like, I feel so smug when I hoon past all the cars in traffic every day, and like I'm past the ocean on the way to work and tapping into my senses. Like, it's fun. It's fun. It's fun to be in a collective and to be marching with people and to be like contributing something to a bigger purpose. It's fun. And I think communicating on a mass scale is like we're communicating on a human level, so you tap into what it feels to be alive in this really complicated time. And it is incredibly hard, but it's also incredibly beautiful. A friend of mine said, you know, what a moment to be alive in a time that matters so much, Catherine Wilkinson, and she, it really struck with me, you know, what a privilege to be able to be changing this course. But I think the role of culture shift, it requires all of these imaginations. That's why we need all of the solutions and all of the solvers, and we need poets and artists and filmmakers and writers and everybody to be thinking about climate change and imagining a different future and imagining a different way forward. One of the organisations I was involved with in the States was helping set up a non-profit to focus on getting more climate storytelling into Hollywood scripted film and television, because it was always just doom narratives, and it's like, well, what's the possibility? Like, what are the other ways we could be doing this? Yeah.
Kia ora. Lucia, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I so agree that talking about obviously, as I said before, starting to think about it is so incredibly overwhelming. There are all of those horrible emotions that you have to go through. But as you said, like there is so much fun, and I'm thinking about how I think lots of people would find this a wild thing to say, but I was thinking about it recently about how like you can call so many different things climate action, and like learning. People might say, you might think, nah, but I'm just going to say it, like learning te reo Māori is climate action. Learning how to harvest harakeke and weave a kete is climate action. Going dancing with your friends at the end of a horrible week of being stressed and trying to get people mobilised is climate action. Like all of these things are what are necessary to both create action and to sustain ourselves, and those things are fun and they're imaginative, and we need to, I think part of like the beauty of intersectionality is that we can also view, well, all of our problems come from the same roots, also all of our solutions are so interconnected. Like I was thinking about how, you know, we go through life always hearing the same advice, like at the top of every article about how to be, I don't know, a better person or a better colleague or whatever. It's always the same things of like spending more time in nature and having more personal connection and all those things. And all of those things are climate action and the things that we are trying to do in our everyday lives. It's all, yeah, good. Imagine it.
Can I pick up on that as well, actually? Because I love that, like that kind of kōrero around widening what climate action actually looks like, because we've seen just for so many years this kind of one model of what it looks like. And as you're also talking about like the different narratives, I think, and the stories that we tell, I think one thing that I found really powerful in my mahi is, you know, weaving in our perspectives as Māori, as kai tahu, and shout out to we've got a couple of tahus in the room as well, you know, weaving in that connection to our own stories of strength, of resilience, and honestly, of adapting to climate change. You know, we oftentimes talk about this as like, you know, it's this thing that we've never had to face. And that might be true on the kind of global scale, but for a lot of communities, we have had to face some really big things, whether that's, you know, within the disabled community, especially, you know, the pandemic, that's been massive, within our, you know, Māori communities and within our iwi, thinking about, you know, what does it mean to navigate and, you know, kind of arrive in Aotearoa, and how do we adapt to the environment there? How do we build those relationships with our taiao? How do we also navigate the social structures and how we want to live and work together and do that, you know, in a way that is symbiotic or, you know, compatible with the environment and the reality of the climate that we're actually living in. And we do actually have a lot of those stories within our iwi, and I don't want to kind of pull out any particular ones because some of those are kōrero for our own people. But, you know, we do have stories of navigators that we can draw on. We do have stories of people who have led migrations because of other challenges, and we can actually draw on that to think about what does it mean now if we have to migrate from where we currently are based, or how do we tackle these big changes in the environment, because it might not necessarily be climate change, but we have got those stories, we have had those experiences, and that's where I think it all comes back to that piece around whanaukataka and relationships, because so much of our society tells us that we're having this individual experience, or that nothing has happened like this before, or that nobody's been doing anything. And I know when I was a teenager, that was my thing of, nobody's ever talked about climate change before. How are these adults, giving us this planet that's burning? Nobody's done the right things, etc., etc. And that anger is really valid and justified in a lot of ways. But when you can actually pair that with that relationship focus, when you can build that solidarity across movements, when you can take climate action that's focused on building connections and relationships interpersonally that are joyful, you start to learn more of, oh, I'm not actually in it alone. There are actually lots of pūrākau that I can draw on for strength. There are lots of different movements that we can learn lessons from. There are lots of people doing really cool things that we can build on and help to amplify and support. So I think it's just really important for us to recognise that those different ways of knowing are really valuable and can contribute a lot to us feeling like climate action is a bit more fun, connected, connecting us to our culture and things.
Kia ora. At the same time, I wonder, do you get frustrated that there are some immediate actions that are clearly going to be beneficial to the quality of life on the planet, moving away from coal, flying less, taxing agricultural emissions? Those are my list anyway.
I've got some more.
How do you deal with the frustration that there are some clear avenues that we should be going down that we're approaching so very, very slowly?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. I'm doing a lot of writing, rage writing. Yeah. I mean, you just got to keep showing up. It is, I think someone said tonight, it's like, one step forward, two steps back. It just feels, it's really frustrating. That's why you've got to find your people and work hard together to try and push back on these systems, because it is the same, systems that are perpetuating the crisis. It's just a handful of companies and people making this happen, on the global scale of things, and it's the fear of letting that power and that wealth go. So,
Did you want to name some of those companies?
The fossil fuel industry. It's the fossil fuel industry has it's the most profitable industry in human history. And they've also controlled the narrative of climate change for the last 100 years as well. So a lot of people don't realise, heavily invested in Hollywood, creating this narrative of individualism. The whole sort of American psyche was built around that, and that was very carefully crafted. The fossil fuel industry invented PR, they invented the press conference, all of this stuff. So our minds have been moulded into this system that's actually only a couple of 100 years old, so we're talking about this old knowledge and these indigenous knowledge systems that are actually, oftentimes quite similar around the world, the knowledge of the interconnectedness of all systems and that we are part of nature, all of these things that have been purposely pushed away by the fossil fuel industry. They even invest in nature documentaries, by the way, because they want us to think of nature as something that's over there and separate and that we're not part of it. Was that? And climate conferences, yeah. It's really heartbreaking, yeah.
Kera, how do you deal with frustration?
With a lot of therapy, and that's not a joke. No, look, I think it is frustrating, and I'm going to be completely honest. When I first got into climate action in my childhood and teens, I was angry a lot of the time. I was very angry. And I think, looking back, I'm sort of like, oh, ka aroha. I look back at that teenager and I'm like, damn, you really needed a lot of support. You had a lot of things to be frustrated about, especially when, climate change wasn't, maybe as discussed as it is these days. But I think something that I have really learnt through, honestly, my own therapy, like personally, is around having that positive, or not positive, it doesn't need to be positive, but having a neutral relationship with your anger. And I think so oftentimes within, particularly on the left and particularly within social and environmental movements, we have this idea, as you say, it's kind of on the one spectrum of either being super angry, rah-rah, protest out in the streets, or on the other hand, we need to be so positive all of the time and just deal with it and be, happy-go-lucky, everything's fine. And I think that both of that is missing the core, which is that climate change is a human problem. All of this that we're talking about are human problems. We're humans living a human experience, and all of those emotions have a place. And so if you can have that healthy relationship with your anger, you can choose, when is that actually telling me something that's happening, whether it's something I'm doing or something in society, is out of alignment with my values. Like, that's a really key indicator to change something. Use it. At the same time, also be able to go, I'm going to work through that in my own ways, whether that's therapy, journaling, all sorts of finding joy in the movement, and use the other emotions as well.
Thank you. Jessica is waving and saying there's lots of questions from the audience, but just before we turn to those questions, frustration. What are your responses, Gloria and Lucia?
I've gone on about this with whoever will listen, but...
We're listening.
Yes, I have a platform. I like to play this thought experiment, and I guess I have an unending well of hope within me. It's something I was born with and annoys the pants off everyone that I talk to. I am generally a hopeful, optimistic person because in my own life I have experienced I guess the manifestation of a dream that I had since I was a little kid come true. I always wanted to work with whales and dolphins. Never understood how it could possibly happen unless I was decades into a career in marine biology. And then in my early 20s, I got the opportunity to go and work with a whale research organisation. This is a little bit of showing off, but I suppose the impact of that experience on my life was I have achieved something I never actually thought was possible, and I didn't have a specific degree to do it. And I suppose having that experience really showcased to me that anything is possible, and this is the imagination piece again. We don't play enough with this idea that anything is possible, and I think all the time, so Mr. TRUMP, he is creating an incredible amount of change, an incredibly fast timeline. Imagine if he did it the other way. Imagine if he said, stuff policy, we're going to protect 30% of our marine environment right now. That's incredible. The power for change is, anyway, there's a huge amount of potential for change, and it doesn't have to take a long time. I suppose I have, like I say, I have that hope, but when I do get frustrated, I tap into creativity. So I unplug. I'm trying to get off social media as much as possible, and I get creative. So I make things, anything tactile that uses my hands and not my brain, and I listen to music.
Thank you. Lucia.
There's a reason I'm a climate activist, and that's because I get to shout at politicians I disagree with. But yeah, kind of true actually. That is one nice little positive to the part of the movement which I am in. Not that shouting at politicians is always the most effective method, and that is where your logical thinking side has to come in, and the peacefulness that you need to find within yourself. But yeah, anger can be a really helpful tool. It's where some of my best most well-articulated rants at politicians have come from, is when I feel like the only time I get truly angry in my life, the only thing that makes me angry is politics and climate change and these things. So it's rare that I really feel it, but it's always when I'm at like some direct action or something, and it's when I start to feel it bubbling up in me that I let it flow over into something not vulgar or full of rage, but and a well-articulated and aim point to make, and I think there is room for anger as long as you use it right. And then that's where community comes in, is after that you go back to your group of activists and you all have a shared kai and have a big debrief and a kōrero, and that's like the beauty of it is in these spaces we need to, and most times we do have spaces which are all for just talking openly and sharing kai and bringing it all back down again, which is so important.
Thank you.
Oh, kia ora. We've only got about 10 minutes left for the Q&A, so on behalf of the audience who've got a set of questions here, I'm going to say not all of you have to answer them, so that we can get through a few of them. One comes from Sarah, who's joined us online. She says, hi guys, wonderful points for reflection. As I was preparing to participate from home, I had a conversation with a family member who made the comment that they didn't believe in climate change as a human issue, and that climate change has been a feature of the world forever, and that it's a natural cycle of heating and cooling. How do you suggest engaging with that attitude to guide a reframe of understanding?
It is true that the Earth has changed over many millions of years, but the difference with this is the scale and the speed with which it's happening. So while we've had periods of heating and cooling, they have not coincided with humans flourishing. So the period that we're living in now is we've flourished and we've figured out how to grow our food and farm and where we live and all of that based on these stable systems. So it's the speed and the scale with which it's happening that's different. So that's a really good way to acknowledge that yes, the Earth there used to be palm trees in Antarctica. That is a true thing, but we weren't flourishing then. So we need the climate in the Goldilocks zone for us to flourish. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martha.
Absolutely. Can I jump in very briefly on that? I will try and be brief. I would take, I think, if they're in the space for that education, I think absolutely tautoko co-sign what Martha's said. Sometimes though, I have found it useful to not come to that conversation trying to change their mind, because I think so often that can just create defences. People get their defences up, and rather have the conversation where, ask them some questions, honestly. Like, if you get other people talking, then you're going to hear through their kōrero what is the piece that they actually really value. Why is that narrative sticking out to them? Is it because they want to go, well, the science is wrong? And then if that's the case, then sure, you can give them that information if they're receptive to it. But also that probably speaks to a different angle you can take with them, and maybe just have some solidarity of like, yeah, actually, you know what? There is a lot of science that's been really confusing. Things have been framed in this way that's really inaccessible for a lot of people. So what is the piece that you actually care about? Do you have knowledge that do you have knowledge because you're really into fishing and you've noticed that we're getting snapper further south, than we used to, or those sorts of things? Is that something that you care about, that you can connect to, rather than trying to come at it from the perspective of, let me take this as the platform to educate you? And I say that as someone who my family can attest to was very annoying for a very long time, coming from that prior, let me educate you about this issue approach.
Oh, thank you. If capitalism is the root cause of climate change, asks someone else, how do you talk to people who think it's the solution?
I mean, I have whakaro, but I want to also share the mic if anyone else wants to jump in first. Okay, so you'll know that O'Regans are not known very much for our succinctness, unfortunately. So I'm going to endeavour to give a shorter answer to something that could be a really big kōrero. In brief, I don't think the systems that create climate change are going to get us out of it. I think that capitalism fundamentally is not fit for our planet and for our continued longevity on it, as Martha was saying. You know, we're in this Goldilocks period zone, right? Where, sure, you want to keep having extractive capitalism and hoard that wealth and make millions and millions and millions of dollars at the expense of the planet. Great. What are you going to have left to spend your money on? You know, what is society going to look like? I don't know about these other, like all of these billionaires, but it doesn't feel like a very appealing planet to live on, you know?
I think a really good, like really short thing to point people to is The Lorax by Dr. Seuss.
It's such a good one. Yeah, it's just like, you know...
It doesn't work. Continuous growth just doesn't work at that scale.
Yeah, it's not viable. And I think that's where, you know, we often see, especially a lot of my work has been in those international climate negotiations and conferences, and we're constantly saying, let's talk about carbon markets, let's talk about all of these businesses that can just green better, and a lot of it comes down to marketing. But what we can actually do is recognise that capitalism is completely human constructed. It's actually relatively new. There are societies that have been able to live you know, within the constraints of our planet, and not to romanticise Indigenous cultures, but a lot of Indigenous people have worked that out through trial and error because we've cocked stuff up at times and we've had to learn from it. And so I think I would really say that I don't see capitalism as being the solution, but at least as much as we can divest from that, and we can divest from that by being in community, by putting our power and our investments into our relationships, into our connections, where we actually don't have to continue feeding this capitalist system.
And actually, speaking of investments, banks, that's what I'm mad at as well. So make sure your bank is not invested in fossil fuels, everyone. There's not very many in New Zealand that aren't. So Kiwi Bank, go Kiwi Bank.
Okay, last question from the audience, because we're running out of time, and Donald gets to ask his last question after this. Someone's pointed out that Ōtautahi's target to reduce our own city emissions by 50% by 2050, and isn't, you know, we're not really getting anywhere near it, in which case, what types of conversations or means of communication should we be using with decision makers?
That is indeed a great question, and yeah, it's frustrating, seeing people preach and try to talk about all their climate action, but then you look at the actual graph and you're like, wow, okay then. That's something that we have been looking at with school strike. We've got a strike coming up, which is all about local elections and talking about how inadequate local action has been from our council. Solutions. Well, I'm thinking it's hard because obviously we need pressure on, people power. We need pressure and numbers demanding action. But then through that, I'm thinking but it's so hard through local government to get young people, for example, or anyone who's not some super clever academic or scientist to understand or to be interested by what looks like very complicated and very boring local legislation. So one thing that we need to do is make policy and local action more accessible to young people.
And fun.
Yes, more fun. And one example was we were looking at the long-term plan last year to try and look at what we need to change and demands to make on how to improve the long-term plan. And it was like a 500-word document of absolute gobbledygook, which only our most clever UC student contact, who's really nerdy and wonderful, could read and understand. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer, but we need to make things accessible, get our young people and all of our different groups from around the city involved, and just continue this work to keep building the pressure. Yeah.
I think the co-benefits of changing the city are really good to highlight as well. So if you're, I don't know Christchurch as well, but Whanganui-a-Tara and Wellington, we are reducing our emissions year on year. And all of the things that have been done are just improving everyone's quality of life. It's more green spaces, it's bike lanes, it's all of these things that create better communities, better health, better connection with nature. So it's that narrative that needs to come forward clear.
If you work with councils at all through your work, then it's about finding those in those organisations who are champions. So not everyone who holds the title of climate change leader is going to be the right person to liaise with for a number of reasons, and it's not a judgment, that's just reality. So if you are trying to get movement within those large organisations, then you need to be looking for the person who is connected to this on the personal level. If you're going to someone who's not personally connected to the mission, then you're not going to get the change that you need. So having conversations with people, again, regardless of the title, going out and connecting with council members through events. Don't corner them at the supermarket, but wherever possible, going and talking person to person and just having curiosity and an openness to those conversations, and you'll begin to weed out who those people are who are making the changes, and you can hitch your wagon onto them, or they can hitch onto you and really support your mahi. It's a bit more quiet, but it's more effective.
Thank you. Oh, a big shout out to Te Pūtahi, who have brought together 4 fantastic wahine toa, who are talking such a different talk to what we hear in a lot of local government elections pitches that we're hearing about people, about care, not about roads and rates and creating more 1950s style suburbs out towards the west of the city. So no pressure, but can I ask the 4 of you to round this part of the session out with one thing that you would want the audience to take away? What's one thing that you would want to leave in people's minds?
I want to make a case for nature-based hobbies as a really good way to slow down and find your joy. I started surfing at the age of 45, and it has totally changed my ability to tolerate a lot of the stress that comes along with climate action, and it forces you to understand the tides and the wind patterns and the currents and things like that. And you don't all have to start surfing, but there's so many nature-based hobbies that can reconnect you with your natural life support systems. It could be bird watching or winter swimming or anything that gets you out, mushroom foraging, whatever it is, but it's a great way to notice and monitor.
Thank you. Lucia.
Colonialism is so entrenched in climate change and the climate crisis, and if it's a new concept to you or the people who you're talking to, it's hard, like whole big another thing to navigate, but it is so interlinked. Like, cannot push that enough, and read up on that and explore that and really rewire yourself to understand the true intersectionality of all of this.
There is no D-Day to this. I know a lot of the science says that there is going to be a day when we throw in the towel and just accept that our fate, and we're going to be hit by the meteor. But I can't tell the future, but I don't believe that to be true. Any action that you take today is going to swing the needle. There's no excuse for inaction, and that's not pressure. That's actually meant to alleviate the pressure. Is we can't be overwhelmed by this idea that if it's all fated, and I'm losing track a bit. But I hope you understand what I mean. Is don't give in to this idea that the volcano is going to erupt and it's all going to turn to crap on this specific day, so why do anything?
it's just a get out of jail free card.
Yeah, it's not a cliff we fall off. There are many versions of a possible future ahead of us.
It's limitless. Imagine telling someone 200 years ago that we were going to be able to shift the way that the planet works if we all just started driving cars. They would have thought we were insane. So really, we have potential to do anything. It's quite amazing, I think.
Kera.
Yeah, okay, what would be my tip or my takeaway? I think I was going to think about WH's, anyway, language is not working in my brain right now. I was going to say, firstly, whakapapa. So think about the whakapapa or the genealogy, I guess, of the issue that you're trying to tackle and the movements that you're part of. Understand where people have come from and who else has been in that space. Whanaukataka, make those connections, whether that's on an individual level, finding that joy. And just a shout out, there's some great resources around, I've forgotten the name of the author, but the book is Pleasure Activism and Nat Ministries, I think, on Instagram. Lots of cool people who talk about sort of joy and different ways of sustainably making change. So whakapapa, whanaukataka, make those connections across movements. Find what people value and talk to them based on what they value, not what you want to talk about, which is a hard thing for me. And lastly, I think also just find that way to make it meaningful. So climate action doesn't have to, and climate communication doesn't have to look one particular way. If your way of doing that is, as you say, having kōrero with other rakatahi and having a dance party about it, awesome. If your way is, doing the mahiraranga, and you're having some kōrero around that when you're going and harvesting. If you're, in more political spaces, find the ways that make change and talking about climate change meaningful for you and the people around you.
Thank you, Kera. I'm sorry we didn't get through. I'm sure you had many more questions you could have posed, Jessica. Thank you for those questions. Thank you for listening, and thank you to our speakers.
O tēnā koutou katoa, thank you to our rangatira, present and future. Just a quick aside, is it too late for have Lucia run for mayor? Is it too late to get... Because this might be a hot take, but I feel like we've given old white dude politics a fair shake, and I'm not sure it's taking us in a good direction, but that's just my take. All right. Ko Ciaran Fox tōku ingoa. It's my pleasure to introduce a bit of poetry into the evening, and I think in the spirit of thinking about how we communicate, I love that we do this, that we turn to a form which helps us sometimes say the unsayable. And so that is why we have a poet here with us. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend Megan Clayton, our poet for the evening. Megan's such a warm spirit, and I really hope that you'll get a sense of that tonight with the poem that she's got for us. Megan writes and performs from Sockburn, Pūtahi, and long-time Christchurch Conversations followers will know that by its traditional name as Soburn, where Megan also... Soburn joke didn't work. Where Megan works in higher education. Megan has poems and essays published both in Aotearoa and in Australia, so please give a warm welcome to Megan Clayton.
O kia ora e te whānau, and tēnā koe Ciaran, e hoa. It's an honour to follow the kaupapa and to close the kōrero tonight. To introduce this, I've got two poems for you, and to introduce this first one, earlier this winter I was writing a much longer and denser and more meandering piece about how some of the challenges for our coastal suburbs, and in particular New Brighton, can follow back to the colonial governments which separated the seaside from the wetlands. And this had dates, it had council meeting minutes from the 1900s, it had lists, and Ciaran is too kind to say, please don't read that, but I'm not going to. In conversation with another writer, Ross Kalman, the historian, he said to me, oh, have you been for a wander around the wetland lately and seen what's happening there? And I said, oh, no, I haven't. So I rounded up my children and said, let's go for a hikoi around North Brighton and see what we can find. And so instead of that long poem, I've got this for you tonight. It's called Atlantis Street, Kamua Kamuri. We walk the length of Atlantis Street, a winter trail from a flooded, shaken city. Past the church with car park and playground, past the new built homes, around the wooden barriers and out onto the wet land. A sign nearby explains the power is on, route marked by lightless lampposts, question marks before a charged and coastal sky. The asphalt remnants now are underwater, the scapeless wasteland answered by lagoon and wetland proper, west of here. Orua Pairoa, where the shore wind blows harsh, and where, in season, tuna, manu, mango, met noho kāinga, a channel to moana nui, wild catching, good eating. At the lagoon, the geese make noisy gathering, squatter migrants who made themselves accustomed to this coastal time, this place. The shore wind charges up, makes fragments of the story we are telling, which is, hey kids, just here, how far, wetland, lost city. New schools, demolished stadium guard the channel mouth now missing, charge the shore. With the lagoon behind us, we squint into the wind. 160 years of seaside suburb dreaming, now moving, kamua, kamuri, to another future state. Kia ora. I'd like to close with some joy. As Ciaran said, I live in Sockburn, which, as you know, or we may know, is the gateway to Hornby, where my extended family is from. And I'd like to remember my sister-in-law, Jessie Reithmiller, who came from the environment in this poem, which is called Dynamite. In Hornby, everyone is doing their best. People are wearing shoes and pack and save, and the shelves in Good Stuff are abundantly stocked and clean. In Valentine's buffet, the server asks God to bless my mum and comps her birthday meal. The office manager at the big garage calls me Dole, a steam for a grateful client. We don't romanticise, not now, not then. Diesel buses on the overbridge for trouble at the pool, the party that started in the house and ended in the street, and yet. From rail to mall to roundabout, we potter on the delta of our dry riverbed, one unforgettable storm away from unimaginable changes. Even so, matatiki. Even so, matatiki me te huruhuru ao o horamaka remind us that where we are above water, the people of Tuahurere once were amongst birds. In between is the shingle, good in an earthquake, a new home for everyone who fled to stay, the last inland migration. Scared together, we carried our babies high in the countdown car park. It is only natural, all of it, says my mother-in-law, from the seat of the river. It's far out here, this bite. Don't forget how, when Dad and Uncle Sam dug the well out back, they finished it, really, with dynamite. Kia ora.
Apologise for running a little bit over time, but a huge thank you to all of our speakers, panellists, chair and poet. I think we're all leaving here with a far better idea of how to make our words count and some steps we can take to improving our climate change conversations, whether that be with ourselves or whānau or within communities and organisations. Thanks again to those who have made tonight's event possible. Christchurch Conversations is funded through the Christchurch City Council Sustainability Fund. The next Christchurch Conversation is on Tuesday, the 23rd of September, and this is looking at life in Pūtahi in 2050, what it might be like, and how we can get ready for it. You can book for this now. There are links on our website. Thank you everyone for coming. See you next time. Mā te wā.